The last vestiges of sunlight, buttery and thick, bled across the worn rug of her living room. It was the same light that had always painted these walls, the same light that had, for years, served as a soft filter for the jagged edges of our reality. But today, it illuminated a truth so stark, so cold, it felt like a physical blow. She stood by the window, a silhouette against the dying day, and the words she just uttered, a casual, almost dismissive dismissal of my entire future, hung in the air, heavier than any argument we'd ever had. They weren't just words, they were decrees, issued from a throne I'd never known existed. And in that moment, with the soft glow of dusk around her, I saw the carefully constructed edifice crumble, revealing the hollow space beneath. My childhood was a masterclass in gilded cages. The house was always immaculate, the meals perpetually perfect, and my report cards adorned with a mother's proud cursive. On the surface, it was the picture of a stable, loving family. But beneath the polished veneer, a subtle current of control flowed, as constant and insidious as rising damp. Every decision, from my choice of friends to my college major, was subtly nudged, then steered, and finally dictated, always under the guise of my own best interest. Her love was a currency she spent judiciously, a reward for compliance, a weapon for dissent. I learned early on to become a ghost in my own life, to anticipate her desires, to preempt her disappointments, to mold myself into the shape she deemed acceptable. It was exhausting, a perpetual performance for an audience of one, and I'd perfected the art of smiling through the quiet erosion of my own will. There was that summer when I was 15, agonizing over a summer internship opportunity. It was prestigious, competitive, and aligned perfectly with my burgeoning passion for astrophysics. I'd spent weeks preparing, poring over applications, practicing interview questions in the mirror. When I finally presented it to her, brimming with nervous excitement, she listened patiently, her hand stroking my hair. Then, with a sigh that spoke volumes of her own martyrdom, she explained how this internship would take me away from family time, how it would be too much pressure for someone so young, how her little girl needed her. The internship went to someone else, someone whose mother hadn't viewed their child's ambition as a personal slight. I buried the disappointment, a familiar ache in my chest, and agreed to attend a local summer camp that was, predictably, less about astronomy and more about crafting and polite conversation. Then there was the time I'd finally saved enough to buy myself a decent used car. It wasn't a luxury, just something reliable to get me to a part-time job that was essential for my meager college savings. She'd been unusually enthusiastic, offering to help me find the perfect one. I was thrilled, envisioning the freedom. The perfect car turned out to be a beautiful, but wildly impractical, vintage convertible. She cooed over it, picturing herself driving it on sunny afternoons. When I pointed out the abysmal gas mileage and the impracticality for my daily commute, she looked genuinely hurt. "But darling," she'd said, her voice laced with a saccharine disappointment that was far more potent than any anger, "I thought we agreed. You know how much I've always wanted a car like this." The car was registered in her name, and she'd borrowed it more often than I did, leaving me to rely on the bus for my job. The freedom I craved was once again, subtly, expertly, reallocated. These were not isolated incidents, but carefully orchestrated maneuvers, each leaving a small, unseen bruise. Each time, I swallowed the bitterness, reminded myself that this was, after all, what a loving mother did. The air in her study was thick with the scent of aged paper and lemon polish. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light that pierced the heavy velvet curtains. I was supposed to be clearing out some old boxes, a chore I'd finally agreed to after months of her passive-aggressive hints about clutter and unnecessary burdens. I'd found it tucked away at the bottom of a trunk, a small, leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. It wasn't locked, and a morbid curiosity, a need to finally understand the architect of my own carefully curated unhappiness, pulled me in. I sat on the floor, the worn carpet cool against my knees, and began to read. The entries were a chilling chronicle. Not of daily musings or girlish confessions, but a meticulous, almost clinical, dissection of her strategies. Every manipulation, every passive-aggressive comment, every subtly thwarted ambition was laid bare, not with guilt, but with a perverse sense of pride. There were detailed accounts of how she'd guided my career choices, ensuring I pursued a path that would keep me close, dependent, and never truly shine too brightly. There were passages detailing how she'd subtly undermined my confidence in relationships, portraying potential partners as unsuitable, selfish, or simply not good enough, all to maintain her position as the central figure in my life. The most damning entries, however, were about the financial arrangements. She'd always presented herself as financially conservative, a prudent manager of the family's modest inheritance. The diary revealed a different story, a calculated hoarding, a careful siphoning of funds that were earmarked for my future, for a down payment on a house, for a safety net. It was all documented, every selfish calculation, every manipulative lie. Then, the final entry I read. It was dated just a few months ago. It detailed her concern over my recent engagement. She'd written about how my fiancé was not the right sort, how he would hold me back, how I was too naive to see his true intentions. The chilling part wasn't the judgment, but the plan she'd outlined, to approach my fiancé directly, to warn him off, and if that failed, to employ more direct measures to dissolve the engagement before the wedding. The casualness with which she wrote about potentially ruining my life, about actively sabotaging my happiness, sent a seismic tremor through me. The diary slipped from my numb fingers, landing with a soft thud on the rug. I looked up, and there she was, standing in the doorway of the study, her hand on the frame, a faint, self-satisfied smile playing on her lips. She hadn't heard me read, but she sensed my stillness. "Found something interesting, dear?" she asked, her voice laced with that familiar, honeyed sweetness that now tasted like ash. Her eyes, however, held a calculating glint, a silent acknowledgement that I had stumbled upon her carefully guarded world. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the room plunged into a deep, unforgiving twilight. The fury didn't erupt, it solidified. It became a granite core within me, cold and unyielding. The diary's secrets had been a poison, but now, knowing their source, I could formulate an antidote. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet, meticulous action. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream. I didn't weep. I simply acted. First, I contacted a lawyer. Not a fiery, dramatic divorce lawyer, but a calm, methodical estate attorney. I presented him with copies of the diary entries, meticulously cross-referenced with financial statements and property deeds I'd quietly gathered over the years. He was, thankfully, a man who understood the subtle artistry of legal maneuvering. We discussed irrevocable trusts, prenuptial agreements my fiancé and I had already drafted, and the surprisingly extensive legal ramifications of financial elder abuse, even when committed by a parent against a child. Then, I spoke to my fiancé. I showed him some of the diary entries, the ones detailing her plans to sabotage our relationship. He was horrified, then resolute. Together, we finalized our wedding plans, not in secrecy, but with an almost defiant transparency. We sent out invitations, detailing the date, time, and venue with unwavering certainty. The day before the wedding, I made my final move. It wasn't a grand gesture, no public spectacle. I simply went to the bank. I withdrew the exact amount she had meticulously detailed in her diary as being set aside for my down payment, the money she'd consistently loaned to herself for various emergencies. It was a significant sum, and its absence would, I knew, create a very specific kind of panic. I then deposited it into a joint account with my fiancé. The following morning, I woke up in my childhood bedroom. She hadn't come in, hadn't uttered a word about the missing funds or the impending wedding. The house was silent, unnervingly so. I walked downstairs, dressed in my wedding attire, and found her in the kitchen, staring at her phone, her face a mask of disbelief. She held a single, official-looking letter. It was from the bank. It informed her that her access to the jointly held savings account, the one she'd considered her personal piggy bank, had been revoked due to a recent marital union. Her jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. She looked at me, and the carefully constructed mask of loving maternal concern was gone, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. The loving facade had finally, irrevocably, cracked. The wedding went off without a hitch. My fiancé's family, who had always been wary of my mother's subtle interference, were nothing short of supportive. My mother, of course, was not present. She sent a curt, unsigned text message that evening, claiming a sudden illness. The flying monkeys, my aunt and a few of her equally gossipy friends, were relentless. They peppered me with concerned calls and thinly veiled accusations, urging me to reconsider my estrangement from my mother. They spoke of family loyalty and the damage I was inflicting. I listened patiently. Why, offered polite but firm responses, and then gently severed contact. The social fallout was predictable. Whispers followed her in their small community. The story, as it filtered through the grapevine, morphed into one of a difficult daughter who had abandoned her ailing mother. She had no one to blame but herself. Her meticulously crafted reputation for virtue and selflessness crumbled under the weight of her own documented avarice and manipulation. Her financial maneuverings, once hidden, were now glaringly apparent, and the quiet loss of her nest egg effectively crippled her ability to maintain her extravagant lifestyle. She was left with her pristine house and her suffocating silence, stripped of the tools she had wielded for so long. There was no grand confrontation, no tearful reconciliation. Just a quiet, profound absence, a chilling testament to the consequences of playing with lives as if they were mere pawns on a chessboard. The satisfaction wasn't in her ruin, but in the quiet, undeniable justice of it all. The light in her study was gone, and in its place, a cold, clear dawn had broken.